This video is part of a series helping you to develop good revision strategies for your exams. Today we're looking at dual coding, what it is and how it can help to improve the effectiveness of your revision. Dual coding is a bit of a buzzword among teachers at the moment, but we don't always use it very accurately. Dual coding isn't actually something that your teacher does, it's what happens inside your brain while you're learning something or while you're revising. When you try to learn something, you're trying to move information from your environment into your long-term memory, and then back again when you remember it. But it isn't possible to do this without going via your working memory. We call the process of moving information from the working memory into the long-term storage encoding, and getting it back out again is retrieval, as in retrieval practice. And you need to be able to do this because if it's not back in your working memory, you can't use it to help you to answer an exam question. We don't know the exact size of your long-term memory, but we know that it's pretty huge. In contrast, your working memory is much smaller, and it can only hold a handful of pieces of information for maybe 18 to 30 seconds before they pass out of it again. And this means that the working memory acts as a bit of a bottleneck, because you can only encode very few pieces of information at a time. However, we know that you don't use the exact same pathways to encode information that you see visually and that you hear verbally. So when verbal information is supplemented by a visual, this allows us to use a different pathway to dual code and thereby take in more information at the same time. Now this might sound a little bit like VAK learning styles, which have been roundly debunked, but it's not, because we're not saying that some people are better at taking in verbal or visual information. We're saying that everybody finds it easier to take in more information when they're receiving that information in a couple of different ways. Just to emphasise how this works, if I tell you that everything is made of atoms and that most of an atom is empty space, but there's a section in the middle called the nucleus which contains positive protons and neutral neutrons, and then orbiting that nucleus are electrons which orbit at fixed distances that we call shells, and that whole atom is about 0.1 nanometers across. And then I now give you that same information with a visual clue. So I tell you that most of this atom is empty space, but that at the centre there is a nucleus containing positive protons and neutral neutrons, and then the electrons are orbiting at fixed distances which we call shells, and that atom is about 0.1 nanometers across. You probably found that the second time round it was much easier to take in that information. Partly because you've heard it again for the second time, but also because you had a visual clue to latch onto and to say, yes, I see what that means now. And this is what dual coding is all about. It's the fact that verbal information and visual information are encoded differently, and so you can take in more information in one go if they're supplementing each other. So how can you make the most effective use of this in your revision? Well, the first thing to identify is that dual coding is going to work when you're showing the same information twice. So you don't just want a pretty picture that kind of vaguely links to the topic. You want a picture that actually shows you the information that you have verbally as well. So you need to pick and choose where it's appropriate to be doing this, because it's not always going to be appropriate. You may also find that it's helpful to use colour to make connections between your visual diagram and also any text that you're including with it. And finally, if you are including a model or a picture, you want to make sure that the labels are actually integrated on it. You don't want to have, oh, this is number 1, and then I need to look at a legend to see what number 1 is, because your brain isn't going to cope with that level of complexity while coping with the words at the same time. Here's an example of how this might look in your revision notes. So here I'm answering a complicated structure and bonding chemistry question, and I want to draw out the importance of a couple of key terms. So my diagrams here show exactly the same information that my notes show, and I've used the red and the blue colouring to make sure that I can see on those diagrams where the key words from my answer are being shown. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you've picked up a couple of tips for how to make the diagrams that you include in your revision notes more effective to help you learn more. If you have found this useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more revision videos coming soon.